everyone to Seize the Day. My name is Linda Ignatz, as he mentioned, and I'm the Advocacy Chair for the Illinois Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, and really am excited to bring to you the new Illinois World Language Standards, which are the national World Readiness Standards as well. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. You do see the tinyurl.com web space here, and all of the resources that are referenced within the webinar, as well as some additional resources, and after this webinar, a PowerPoint as well, and link to the live webinar for those who can't listen to us live today, will all be included in that tiny URL. So you want to check that out and provide those resources to your teachers and colleagues. So with that, let's go ahead and get started and seize the day. So when we talk about the World Readiness Standards, we start with where was Illinois prior to this adoption. And the Illinois standards from the 1990s, actually the last century, were goals 28, 29, and 30. And these goals dealt with communication, or just sort of that concept of speaking, which we're going to see as an iteration in the new standards as well. But then there was some more specifics with culture and geography, connections and applications. And you're going to see links and certainly some comparatives between the old standards and the new standards. But what was missing from the former standards were assessment guidelines or any kind of progress benchmarks or performance indicators in terms of were students or language learners actually meeting the standards. And so that's the big change and the big shift to the new standards. The World Readiness Standards of Learning Languages are national in scope. They were developed in 1996 and then revised in 2006, and most recently were refreshed to include interculturality in 2015. It was, while they're distributed by ACTFL, they are not the ACTFL standards. They are, in fact, the national standards. Because it was a collaborative project, and in 2019, this year, now adopted by the Illinois State Board of Education as the World Language Standards for the state of Illinois. This is a collaboration, these World Readiness Standards, between 17 stakeholders, and these represent all of the language-specific national organizations. So if you're a Spanish teacher, you'll see that the American Association of Teachers of Spanish and Portuguese was a part of this, but also teachers, the organizations representing Arabic or French or Hindi, and even American Sign. So all of our languages were considered and are represented in the World Readiness Standards for Learning Languages. ACTFL, which is the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, publishes this two-page summary document. And this is basically what we're going to be looking at today, because we don't have enough time to go into lots of detail within this 1 hour webinar, but we do want to highlight these 5 C's, or these 5 national standards. And so this document, as a summary piece, is a free download and available on the publications link that you'll see here. I've also included this document in the tiny URL. So we're going to kind of delve into these 5 different pieces. For further or more information, ACTFL has worked together and collaborated with the Illinois State Board of Education to include a free 19-page downloadable PDF from the ISBE World Languages website. And you'll notice here, this is a screenshot from that website and where you would look to find this downloadable PDF. ACTFL also provides a large, very in-depth book on World Readiness Standards for Learning Languages for sale. But you can get all of the can-do statements, the 2-page summary, and some supporting documents in this 19-page PDF. Again, this link is here, and we've also included it in our tiny URL resource folder. The World Readiness Standards intentionally align with other curricular initiatives with which you may be familiar. So if you're an AP school or an international baccalaureate school, these standards will already be a part of those curriculum considerations. In addition, anyone who has a national board license or is a new teacher that went through the EdTPA process, those are also aligned, as is our new Illinois licensure testing system testing program with these world readiness standards at the national level. Additionally, there are crosswalks to both the partnership or P21 21st Century Learning, as well as the English language standards on the Common Core Initiative. So all of these pieces have aligned and are correlated to these new world readiness standards. ACTFL, the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, also provides a very short 4-minute video that I have a link to here, and is also included in that tiny URL that you could share with administration or world language colleagues, which is a much briefer overview than the one that I'm going to provide to you today. But it does describe the 11 content standards within the 5 C's. It does explain how the progress indicators or the performance indicators are created and how they represent different levels, and so that these standards may be used with elementary, middle school, high school, and even university language learners. And so this is a great video, and again, there's a nice little link to it. It's very short and easily shared. I'd like you to look at then the relationships between the national, state, and local standards. And so we begin on the left with this gear that represents the global view of the national standards, and that they do incorporate K through 20 language learners, and they're based on the ACTFL proficiency measures, and I will talk about those a little bit later in the webinar, but they really help us measure at what language level of proficiency, what skill set, how well do language learners use the language, and those pieces are all aligned within the standards. Those integrate with state frameworks. So now the national standards are also the Illinois state standards. And these are aligned not only to those curricular areas that we're going to discuss, but also to some very important type 1 assessments, including what's not considered an assessment, but an award, the Seal of Biliteracy. And so that's integrated into this level, and the state Seal of Biliteracy has as its criteria an ACTFL proficiency measure level. Those then kind of come down to our district curriculum level, where that the district, there are units, a sequence of learning, there are the district resources, the chosen methodologies that are used within the district, and these also then align to those standards. And then at the classroom level, we have the individual teacher's lesson plan. The learning objectives become the can-do statements, the specifics of their lesson, the assessments, whether they are type 1, type 2 district assessments, or even teacher-created type 3 assessments, and the strategies that the teachers use for those individual learners and differentiated instruction within their classroom. And so these all do integrate, and I'd like to show you how that can happen. The most important at the state level, but it's also a national piece, is the Seal of Biliteracy, which is now a law in 36 states, plus the District of Columbia have a state Seal of Biliteracy. There's also the Global Seal of Biliteracy, which meets university students as well as students in private schools, and many individuals in public schools as well are using that award. But the Seal of Biliteracy is a statement that a learner has achieved a particular level of language proficiency in English and another language. And what we see from the research is that it's become a positive incentive for individuals to take ownership of their language learning and to achieve some professional outcome goals that could include scholarships, advanced placement in the college level, jobs, study abroad opportunities, and so forth. And so we really find that this has become an exciting piece. And I'd like to share just some of the data on the Illinois State Seal of Biliteracy. After only 4 years, you'll see that the very first year, the state seal, there were 504 awards given out in only 15 participating school districts in 10 languages. The larger infograph to the right, which is available at the ISBE State Seal of Biliteracy website, this infograph is done yearly, so you can see the progress. It also includes the impact on English learners that you'll see at the very bottom right part of that piece. And this was the summary report from 2018. And you'll see that that 504 became 4,444 in 2016-17 and added another 1,000 plus students in 2018. And so that's 5 times the growth in 4 years. So it's a huge number that we're seeing annually participate in this program. And it's very, very exciting to see that language learners want this award. But to achieve it, they have to do more than just serve seat time in a language classroom. Typically, a language is sometimes taken just as to meet a college entrance requirement. But now the State Seal of Biliteracy means that many of your language students are going to want to take more than just those 2 years of an English or rather a language requirement for a college level. In fact, the research is saying that students are actually extending their language program and taking the language not just to get a college entrance requirement, but to actually acquire language skills that are useful to them in the workplace. And so that's really an exciting piece that we're seeing as a change. And this article in the Foreign Language Annals is going to detail a lot of those results based on 3 different high schools and different phases of implementation of the Illinois State Seal of Biliteracy. And again, the links that you'll find in that tiny URL. So this is just one of the pieces of data that came from that particular research. So we see that in high schools that adopt a Seal of Biliteracy program, that their AP enrollments or their upper level enrollments can double. And we see this one with this particular school and their district numbers within 2 years went almost to a double number in the AP level. And of course, AP scores affect your state report card for your school and even can impact real estate prices. So it's really exciting to see what this can do for your school when that is applied. We also hear from student voices that a Seal of Biliteracy is something that students want, and they begin to engage in learning, and we actually see that the level of acquisition of language increases because it's not just a teacher goal, it's actually now a student goal. And these are just some quotes from students that they've made about a Seal of Biliteracy. They're aware of their test scores, they're aware of benchmark testing that tells them the level, and they're tracking how close am I, what do I need to do to get the Seal of Biliteracy? What changes can I make as the learner? I love the student that said, finally, a test that counts for something, or the one that says it gives you a motive to finish. In other words, that retention change in the language department. Before I was like, why am I in this class? And now they know they're there to actually acquire a useful language. And so we see that the State Seal of Biliteracy in Illinois built retention, but it's more importantly linked to student engagement and student motivation. And so students were asked, to what extent do you feel these items benefit, what would be the benefit of a Seal of Biliteracy? And about 2/3 to 3/4 of the students responded that it was about future employment opportunities, career use, the benefit of having this on their transcript, whether that was going to help them with college admission or advanced placement credit or scholarship opportunities, that students saw the inherent value of having this award. And so it really does impact change. And we've seen a number of students earn scholarships, as well as in, for example, at the University of Illinois, the State Seal of Biliteracy is given 8 hours of automatic college credit. And so that's an amazing piece and tool that language learners, but it's based on these actual performance outcomes. It's based on whether they can do these can-dos these learning progress indicators that are a part of the World Readiness Guidelines. And so how do these standards engage learners? They do it in 5 areas: communication, cultures, connections, comparisons, and communities, or what we call the 5 C's. They're called the World Readiness Standards because these progress indicators are based on real-world topics, real-world tasks, and tools that are useful to the language learner in real settings. And so they're very much hands-on, they're very much active learning processes, and we'll get into each one of them individually in a few minutes. They are all arranged or organized around the proficiency guidelines. And these come from ACTFL. We mentioned a little bit earlier. You see the cone to the right. And this cone starts at the bottom low. Novice low is the lowest level of language. This would be your first year, first semester student that has very little language, very little vocabulary, and can do very minimal amounts of things. And what they can do is sort of memorized and highly practiced in the classroom, all the way up to the superior level where someone could be a translator at the United Nations with nuance and specificity in any particular area. These guidelines do not equate to a year of study. It could be at any point in study, whether someone begins in a dual language program in kindergarten, or they wait until their freshman year of high school or college to begin language learning. They indicate what a learner is capable of doing. What tasks can they describe? Can they compare and contrast? Could they ask and answer questions? And at what level, or with what level of skill, what quality of vocabulary, what level of accuracy that they can do those individual tasks. And these are all aligned with Type 1 assessments. For example, a university that has NCATE certification, the pre-service teacher would need to be at the advanced low level of language to qualify to do their student teaching. So everything is aligned at each level. These can be seen in a very hands-on practical way when we take one of the supporting documents, which are the NACESFL, or the National Council of State Supervisors of Foreign Language, and the ACTFL can-do statements. So these are our learning targets. And this particular supporting document is a part of that 19-page piece that is on the ISBE website and in our tiny URL folder. And you'll see that each one of our World Language 11 content standards is addressed by level. So you see intermediate low, intermediate mid, intermediate high. And these are the practical tasks. And as a language educator in the classroom, I needed to share these tasks with my students so they knew what they needed to do to achieve a Seal of Biliteracy, but also what did they need to do to meet the content standards of our curriculum. And so I sifted them out and included them in very simple form that was student friendly in English, or L1 language, their first language, so that the lowest learner would be able to know, oh, that's the expectation. And the important piece about these can-do statements are these tasks are things that we do. They're not connected to a particular vocabulary topic. They're not connected to a grammar topic. They are more overarching tasks that you would do in any part of life. For example, I can describe in detail, might be for a level 1 learner, something about describing their family, but a doctor might have to describe to his patient in the target language their medical situation. So description in detail is something that we can do at any level of language, but is something that gets repeated. And what's the wonderful thing about using can-do statements with students as learning targets is they see over and over again, oh, I'm asking and answering questions again. Oh, I'm disagreeing and agreeing. I'm comparing and contrasting. And that they see this repetition of tasks and begin to understand that's what creates language acquisition, as opposed to I just know the conjugations of a particular verb. And so these benchmarks, these progress indicators, are leveled by those same levels that we saw in the cone. For example, here we see for communication, the novice level and the intermediate level in all three sub-content standards of the different ways we communicate. If you look over to the left, to the right, that proficiency benchmark, you'll see that, for example, the benchmark of how can I exchange information, ideas, and conversations. At the very low level, the novice low learner is saying, I can provide information by answering a few simple questions on familiar topics with practiced and memorized phrases with the help of gestures or visuals. So you know what that first year level teacher is doing with all their hand gestures and pointing to things. They're supporting comprehensible input from the teacher. But on the high end, that same task, I can request and provide information, but now they're using original questions and making simple sentences most of the time. And of course, we could imagine someone at the very high end of that proficiency cone can exchange information and ideas in a very sophisticated way. And so we see the benchmark, and then how well does the student accomplish the task. And for language, we measure these in 4 different ways. We talk about the most important piece being the roots. The roots are the content, the vocabulary that the student is using to communicate the message. And the more vocabulary they have, the more topics that they can communicate on. The trunk is the actual tasks. It is those sample progress sort of indicators of performance. Can they describe? Can they narrate? Can they support an opinion? The next piece are the branches, and that's sort of begins to get into the how well can they do the task. Is it simple words or short sentences, or do they have sentences with connections, and do they have transitions, or is it a full-blown organized paragraph with an introduction and a conclusion? And then finally is the accuracy. And this is actually the least important, because I can communicate with bad grammar or poor pronunciation. If I said I to work yesterday rather than I worked yesterday, my message could still be communicated, but the accuracy wasn't 100% there. And here we are in the fall of the year, and our leaves from the trees are starting to fall off, but the tree still lives. And that's really important to students to know that accuracy will come with practice and ongoing levels of higher proficiency, that they may not come at the very beginning. And we want students to actually do both. We want to connect to their needs, because that's going to engage them. What does the student need the language for? Maybe they want to speak to a grandparent. Maybe they want to do a study abroad. What are their goals? Can we connect to their career goals? Can we help them get a scholarship or advanced placement at the university level? Can we connect to their interests? You'll notice that a student seems uninterested in your class until you begin to talk about sports or food or something that all of a sudden gets them excited. And then finally, those students that just are there because they feel like they need 2 years of language, sometimes there's something that will just grab their attention. And so we, as language educators, we need to look for those pieces. And the World Readiness standards are a great way to do that. And they also support the growth of language proficiency through those 4 pieces we talked about on the tree: the functions, the content, the text type, how much they can say or write, and the accuracy, how well they do each of those things. So when we look at the actual student as a language educator, our goal is to move from seat time and just taking 2 years as a checkoff course to get college, be college ready, to actually getting them to a state seal of biliteracy or a global seal of biliteracy, where the student says, I'm here to acquire language as a mentality. I'm here to grow my skills, to be able to really use them in the workforce or in my own personal life. And I think we can do that using these world readiness standards if we think about them as individual gears. So that student, for example, that wasn't really interested in your class until all of a sudden you started to talk about climate change or saving the Amazon forest, all of a sudden that student who's interested in science, is interested in the preservation of our economic and our ecology resources, our natural resources, all of a sudden is interested in your class. And to turn on one goal, in that case, connections with science, begins to move all of the other gears. I want to talk about that, so I'm going to learn that vocabulary. I'm going to learn how to do that task. And so my goal or my challenge to you is to really seize the day by thinking about each of these world readiness standards as something that connects to individual students that are in your classes and in your schools. There's a student that matches each one of these, and it will help personalize the language learning for you. So we begin with our communication standard. The communication standard is to be able to communicate effectively in a variety of situations for multiple purposes. And it has three aspects. Interpersonal communication is two-way, going back and forth. I need to understand as well as communicate. And that could be writing back and forth through texting or email, but it could also be a live conversation. Interpretive is what I understand about what I take in the language. Did I understand the sign or the menu? Is it what it's it's understanding and comprehending what I read or write, read or listen to, or even watch in some sort of media. And presentational is how can I share what I know? And too many times the classroom is focused on the presentational when we want to be doing all three. And so here's an example of a student that was turned on by the communication mode. This is Maddie, and Maddie has Asperger's syndrome. And she was very shy in class. She was the person who had very accurate work, but didn't want to do any group work or work with a partner. And she was very shy and very reserved. But little by little, she really acquired language. And when challenged by her mother to travel to on a spring break tour, in this case it went to Argentina, she had the opportunity to find out she could help and support the other language learners, the other students on the trip. And all of a sudden she realized she was very good at it, and she began to blossom and began to use language in the form of Spanish every opportunity that she had. And then studied abroad in college with a double major in Spanish and biology. Her mother said that language class was where she found her voice. And so we look at these pieces, interpersonal, where students are interacting with others, they're negotiating meaning, they're sharing information, reactions, feelings, opinions. This is how we connect with others. So that's an important skill. It has to happen in the language classroom. The second content standard underneath communication C is presentational. This is oftentimes what we do in the classroom when a student presents a project, and we need to give them opportunities to use what they have learned in a presentational way. So they can inform, explain, persuade, narrate. These are all Bloom's taxonomy of pieces that can happen in the language classroom and really can support the learning of content from other curricular areas. And finally, we have the last content standard under the communication C of interpretive. And this is where they're understanding or interpreting, analyzing, taking away cultural interpretations of things that they have learned. And these naturally will connect with things. Well, compare and contrast that to what is my culture like when I read these topics. And we put these three pieces, and now we integrate them with the other four C's. And so when we look at the cultures, as we learn about cultures, we're doing interpretive learning. We're learning about it by what we read or what we observe in a movie or what we have listened to in a popular song in the target language. And then we talk about it. We have an interaction. We do interpersonal. We share back and forth. What did you hear? You know, how do you compare? Where would you like to go? What appealed to you about this particular city that we just studied? and then the performance or that presentational mode to be able to share that out. And we can do each of those things. And so we look at those those three modes of communication as something we do with the other four content areas. And so to look specifically at cultures, we see that culture is broken down into two content standards. One is about the practices and one is about the products. What that looks like is this. In language, we have students that are going to be so excited about culture that, they perk up, and it's, culture shouldn't be something we just do on Friday or with the extra time before a test. It is what turns certain students on in your classroom. It's what gets them excited about language learning because they want to travel, because they're curious. And that happens to be Juanita, who now is actually Señorita Berenger, because in class, the culture was what was so exciting to her that she actually became a dual language Spanish teacher in the first grade. But we look at these cultures as being these three components: a product, a practice, and a perspective. And we don't want to limit ourselves to the products. For example, right now there's Oktoberfest going on in Germany. That's a kind of a product. It's a celebration. An equivalent celebration upcoming in Mexico might be the Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead. But a product is something a culture has. And one product that every culture has is greeting others. And yet the practice, how different cultures greet others in different situations and different social contexts, changes. It might be a handshake. It might be the French BC kiss. It could be a bow. And it could even be a high five. We greet different people in different ways because of our culture and because of the formality of the situation with which we find ourselves. And that all speaks to perspective. Are we greeting out of respect? Are we greeting out of affection? What is appropriate in one culture is not necessarily comfortable in another culture. For example, the French BC may not be something that your students are going to do in your school, but it would be very appropriate if they chose to study abroad in France, and they would learn the appropriateness of that language, and that can happen within our classrooms. And those are things that we want to discuss, that we are, even though we do it in different ways, we all greet others. And so when we take a list like this particular list, which probably looks very familiar, of our common topics, especially at the levels 1 and 2, we want to take those and say, how do we make these better reflect culture? How do we learn from the real world about these products? How does food as a product change? What are the practices of daily routine? How does that differ from one country to another? And what is the perspective? How do I view things like choosing a career in one culture compared to another? And we want to think about not being limited by this, but actually using these common topics as a springboard for exploring culture and making connections with other curricular areas, because it's going to happen naturally. And so under the connections C, we have two content standards: making connections with other curricular areas and disciplines, and then acquiring information about other things like science and art and music and archaeology, or whatever the interest of your students may be. And you want to think about if what will engage my students. This particular student, Romeo, was engaged by science. Anytime we talked about scientific things in class, he got excited, he got interested. And that's what our goal is, because in a language classroom, you can teach anything, you're just teaching it in the language. And the more we integrate with career, because it is the area of content and other curricular areas that people will use that vocabulary in their future careers. For example, in a medical career or something to do with science. So give you an example of how that integrates into what you may already be doing in your departments. Let's look at this, is to actually look at the AP content standards, or the new UNESCO Sustainable Development Goals. And let me come back to that. That kind of skipped there quickly, which really integrate vertically and align K through 16 with issues that are important to students to learn. Things about poverty or zero hunger, gender equality, access to education, or things like clean water. And so, for example, if we take those, we can engage learners in content-related extracurricular activities like other curricular areas like environmental science. For example, rather than talking about my own particular hygiene and daily routine with water, I take a shower, I get up, I get dressed. Let's show an interesting image about what the world does with water. Maybe they have to go and walk a mile or two to get water on a daily basis. That would change things like daily routine. It also is something that is scalable and engaging to students at an interest level. Students care about that. They're curious about that. That's outside of the realm of their experience. And so the novice level learner can be talking about things with simple vocabulary that is practiced and highly memorized in some cases, but can substitute content language that's important and interesting and engaging to them and really meaningful in an altruistic way in the world that helps me understand more about my world. So example, I can't. I have access to water. I don't have access to water. I have to drink bottled water. I don't have water and I have to walk to get bottled water, and so on and so forth. At the advanced level, it might be if this is true, then this is also true, or more advanced grammar. I might do this if my situation allowed. And so we think about how do we engage learners in real content activities that are more meaningful. If we take that a step further, we also think about a two-pronged approach to learning about other content areas. And this is especially important to engage the high school learner, but is a part of the curriculum that we would build in an elementary language program, where we're meeting both language objectives, things like describing and comparing and contrasting, alongside of content objectives where I'm actually learning about my world. And so before, where I might have just talked about daily routine and what I do in order, and actually in the real world, nobody says I wake up at this time and then I shower and then I brush my teeth. Nobody talks about that to their neighbor or to their friend or their colleague at work. But we can talk about the global challenges from those UNESCO Sustainable Development Goals and talk about what would my daily routine look like or change if I didn't have access to clean water. Instead of just providing a hygiene vocabulary list, we can talk about other kinds of content vocabulary for a student who might be one of those that can help solve the world's water issues. And so it's a really important overlay to think about what are my content objectives, not just my language learning objectives. Content objectives answer the question for the student, why in the world am I learning this? Why am I in this class? Because they give them a motivating reason to use the language. They want to acquire the vocabulary because this is interesting enough of a topic to talk about, and I need the tools to be able to discuss my opinion on infant mortality in the world, or is there access to water, and all of those kinds of things. And so we look at these as motivational. They are connected to great essential questions, and they work best when they're related to what students are learning in other subject areas, because now we overlay learning and we make it deeper and we make it more interconnected. Once we do that, comparisons to students are natural, because when I learn about the world and how different it might be from my own experience, I make natural comparisons. And so I make those cultural comparisons because I see that somebody else does something a little differently than I do. But I can also make language comparisons. One of the students that I was really excited about that really turned me on to thinking about language comparisons was Zubair, who came from the United States at the age of about 10 from India. And he was a state Seal of Biliteracy learner, the one in the first group from Lincoln Way High School. And he used his language because of his medical interest to actually work in Will County in a internship program to provide medical services to Hispanics, where he used his language, and now he's a doctor. But all throughout, he compared what was his lifestyle in India, what was his lifestyle here, and then how did that interconnect with the new language he was learning and the cultures. And we look at language learning and cultural comparisons on a regular basis in the classroom. And this is kind of a visual of what that could look like. It's just in the concept of the interpersonal. We're bringing back that communication piece, interpersonal in the form of texting. And we can make language comparisons by looking at the vocabulary. For example, on the left, in Spanish, they tend to leave out letters, not just use acronyms. And that's a real common part. But we can also make cultural comparisons. We can find what's similar as well as what's different. Wow, here is Chinese, but they're using emojis just like I do. And so it's really an exciting kind of piece when we think about comparisons in more than one way. And it's exciting to students. And ultimately, that takes us to this idea of communities and how we interact not only as a school or a local community, but how we interact globally with others. And we really want to embed, now that you have a language skill, this allows you to have lifelong learning. And so, for example, this particular student is working with an NGO in the Dominican, in Central America, working with students that are they're rescuing off the street. And my particular high school students then did a student interpersonal communicative activity with pen pal writing back and forth with these students. And so we begin to see this connecting with our own world globally, and how do we fit into the greater world. Interest is this psychological state of engagement. If we can increase the interest, that's going to pull students in. And we do that by putting these 5 C's together. We start out with that essential question. We start out at the content level. This one would be geography, but also comparisons. What might my life be like if I lived here? And we begin to familiarize themselves with the world. And we think about, well, there's snow and there's mountains, but there's also sea. Maybe I might think about what we might eat here or what activities. And we begin to bring students in to think about what the world looks like and what they might be like if they were in another place. And then we can begin to ask more specific questions, like why my family's in the Andean region of South America raise guinea pigs. Well, I don't know, because they like them for pets, but because they're cute, because they, at the high levels, they don't eat a lot of grass because there's a lot of altitude. And now I know the grass doesn't grow there at those high levels of altitude. So I can feed them, but maybe it's about food. And so we begin to sort of engage students in a completely different way of interest. And so when I look at interconnecting these goals in the classroom, I find pieces, some authentic material that's going to engage their interest, that's going to inform them about something they didn't know or support something they've already learned. It's going to connect with another curricular area. It's going to give them a chance to compare and contrast. It might just amuse or entertain. It could challenge, like thinking about access to water, or it could surprise and shock, like, oh my goodness, what is this young man going to eat? And if that you have that learner that's not particularly engaged in your classroom, that surprise or shock will prompt more questions, and that is student engagement. And so we look to authentic resources and carefully select those that are going to support those 5 C's, that are going to give us the chance to use language in different ways, to use language in real ways, to learn something about my world, and then maximize that to how will I apply that in a real context or a real setting. And so students can do that with something at a very low level with just using imagery to describe, in this case, 4 images from hungryplanet.com, where they put all of the food supply that a family uses in a week. And students can compare and contrast. Even elementary students or low-level language high school students can say, wow, you know, the food is fresh, the food is frozen, there's more variety, something else is more processed, and we can begin to talk about things at a number of different levels of cognitive ability as well as language skill. And so scaffolding something like a food topic could engage with a menu or videos. We can inform with food pyramids, which change from country to country. We can support with food recipes or commercials. We can connect to issues that are important like diabetes or obesity or how to eat healthy. We compare and contrast with a geographic impact. For example, the school lunch on the right doesn't look like the one that was served in my school cafeteria. We can talk about celebrations and how people use certain foods at particular times of the year or to celebrate certain events. But we could talk about the challenge that engages students who are very altruistic at heart in issues of like global hunger. Or we could ask about unusual foods. And each one of these things is going to prompt questions and allow us to use those 3 modes of the communication standard: interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational. And we can begin to use these different pieces in ways that are really important to student learning, but also give them content information about the rest of the world, about other curricular areas such as science, that allow them to present information in a way, for example, these brochures that students created on issues important to them: diabetes, depression, and obesity. And so we scale it up to, for example, those AP levels with something that addresses a real world problem. And so our thoughts here really are to think about how do we seize the day. There are so many different supportive resources that I've provided to you in the tiny URL. These are just a few of those resources. We see those standards, we see our performance descriptors, those can-do statements, those very specific leveled topic learning targets. We see the crosswalk to the 21st century skills map. We see something interesting that's also leveled to show oral proficiency levels in the workplace, or how much language does a student need to do a job. And this is a small icon of a free downloadable poster, which you will have access to in the tiny URL. But if you look at the middle column, the low level was blue, the middle level was green. Until they get to the upper levels of that green intermediate space, there are no jobs available. Unless students do stay in the language classroom in retention for something like a Seal of Biliteracy, they don't actually have enough language to do those real things that are supported by the new standards. And so we really want students to think about what is it that will how will language impact my life and give me something meaningful to do? And it's that, that sort of magic combination that really does engage learners. And so we've finished the webinar, and it's time now to seize today's opportunity to ask some questions. And I'll turn it back over to our moderator. And thank you.
Linda, thank you so much for sharing that wonderful information about the World Readiness Standards. Very powerful stuff. Appreciate your time with us this morning. We did get several questions to come into the questions box as you were presenting. We'll start with William's question. What is the earliest age that a student can earn the seal?
The state Seal of Biliteracy is awarded to graduating seniors, and for the state Seal of Biliteracy for the state of Illinois. And those guidelines are on the ISBE website for the Seal of Biliteracy. And they can generally be access those scores in usually it's their junior or senior year. The global Seal of Biliteracy is a little different. It's available to a language learner of any age that can meet the criteria. And so the criteria generally for language learning at that level to have that cognitive skill is usually from middle school and up.
Okay, and a follow-up question about the SEAL. Can students obtain the Seal of Biliteracy during college courses, or must that be done during high school?
So for the Illinois State Seal of Biliteracy, as well as the other 35 state seals, it is a recognition program at the high school level only. However, the Global Seal of Biliteracy is something that is awarded to university students and actually to adults and to teachers. About 25% of the Global Seal Awards are going to university students, many of them not majors or minors, but are, for example, in nursing and see that having a biliteracy credential would be useful. And that particular award can even be entered in on LinkedIn because it's serial numbered.
Great. This question from William again, are there any resources? I know you cannot recommend a specific resource, but a resource that addresses the new standards.
Yes, and in the tiny URL, we've included many resources, including a very user-friendly article on each of the content standards. It includes some further classroom implementation pieces. So I would suggest explore that tiny URL folder and you will find more resources than you might know what to do with.
Excellent. Priscilla says, a lot of the examples focus on low-level elementary education or middle high school. Could you give more examples of higher levels, such as upper-level university courses for language majors?
Yes, absolutely. And the content world language standards are really designed to scale all the way up through the university pieces and actually even into adult learning. So for example, the task project pieces are things that are at any level. But at the novice and intermediate level, a lot of those standards. But the standards actually go and have descriptor progress indicators all the way through up the superior level, which is well beyond a university student, my guess. But you'll also see, for example, in the project-based learning space, a lot of community pieces with global issues, with global problems that can very much be scaled at the university level. So while my images reflected novice and intermediate tasks, those same standards address all the way through the advanced level and superior tasks. So you would find a lot of content there, as well as some suggested activities and that you can develop. The 21st Century Skills Map would be another place where there are specific activities that a number of teachers in a number of languages across the United States have contributed, actual tasks and learning activities that are all coded to one of the 3 communicative modes as well as to the standards. So that's a great resource, that 21st Century Skills Map, and there's a link to that in the tiny URL.
Perfect. All right, Melanie asks, is there a recommendation from ISB in regards to state standards for heritage courses?
The content standards are not specific to heritage or non-heritage learners because they are actually the task-based. But there is some interesting white paper and resource information that's provided by the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, ACTFL, specific to what we refer to as heritage learners, or those who have a heritage learning background. They've heard the language. Oftentimes their interpretive skills are much higher than their productive skills. And so that's oftentimes the focus of where you can work with those students. But there are a lot of resources that would be available. And there is, ACTFL has a special interest group, or SIG, S-I-G, that's specific to heritage learners, where you would find some additional resources that will connect those two pieces.
All right, Viviana says, thank you for all your support over time and with this powerful presentation. May I be able to have the link to your PowerPoint and the webinar? Yes, we will provide a follow-up email that's going to have a link to the recorded webinar, and we can include a link to your PowerPoint. Is that correct, Linda?
Yes, it is. In fact, we'll actually conclude put the PDF and link it to the live webinar as well, so someone can find both.
Perfect. All right, Erica asks, what is a good place to find more information on the interculturality besides the ACTFL site?
So interculturality is a really interesting piece, and there is actually a SIG that is working with that as well. And I would look to the language educator that is issued and that has a number of articles that are very practical, classroom level, that address interculturality. That's one of the topics that we will be looking at in an upcoming webinar, because it is connected and integrated with the 5 C's, is a sort of component of those, but is a big topic and needs more time than what we had today.
All right, Kara asks, do you have resources to help inform standards-based grading practices instead of traditional grading in elementary schools?
If you're looking at the standards-based piece, the world language, the 5 C's, that supporting document of the can-do statements, or those progress indicators, are being used by a number of elementary schools around the country. One quick one that comes to mind is Lexington 1 in South Carolina. And in that, they actually move students through the language grades based on their content standards. So they actually use these can-do statements as a way to promote or not move a student based on their progress. So that would be, those are some great, they have some great resources, but there are a number of schools that are actually using the can-do statements as a barometer of progress and grading as well.
All right, appreciate that, Linda. Final question from Priscilla. This is a follow-up on William's question. Could we go over the main recent changes? My language department has been working with the 5 C's and granting credit for students who start college with a Seal of Biliteracy for years, but we are trying to identify what the recent development and changes are.
I'm not quite sure. I'm assuming this is at the college level, it sounds like. So in 2017, the state board is implemented a new law by the state legislature that asked for universities to align their course curriculum with proficiency levels. So in other words, these sort of this ACTFL cone of intermediate, novice, etc. And to be able to align that, that would provide for placement for students who have taken a proficiency test. Those tests and what qualifies at each level and what are the required scores can all be found on the ISBE sealofbiliteracy.org website. And so those will list what tests or qualifications will integrate. So that's the most recent legislative change in terms of the Seal of Biliteracy for college placement. And so if a university coursework looks very carefully at those language proficiency levels and says, okay, so what can our semester 1 students do at the end of 101? And then that would provide them with the best sort of alignment or placement for credit. But at this point, different universities offer a different amount of credit, and that's because their coursework is aligned differently.
All right. Well, Linda, thank you so much for your time and your expertise this morning. And I want to thank all of our participants who logged on and stayed with us for the full hour. I will be sending out a link to this recording today and a link to complete an evaluation form that, once completed, will generate that ISB evidence of completion form if you are an Illinois educator. Thank you all so much and have a great school year. You are now free to, thanks. You're free to close the GoToWebinar control panel, and that will log you out of the system.